Ready or Not is going through one of the weirdest controversies I have ever seen. They are in the midst of an identity crisis. Over the years, Void Interactive's realistic SWAT game has been the center of news articles about how red-pilled and grotesque gamers were, how the devs and community happily embraced missions that depicted mass casualty events, human trafficking, child abuse, meth labs, school shootings, literally the worst of the worst. But time after time, the devs stood firm and they said, real life is horrible, and we want to depict law enforcement responding to these horrible situations as realistically as possible. They believed in this realism so much so that even when their original publisher said, you need to tone it down or we're not going to publish your game, the devs walked. Void Interactive self-published because Team 17 could not get them to censor their game. That was 4 years ago, and today, Void Interactive is censoring their game. Words I never thought I would be speaking, but we've come full circle. In preparation for the game's launch to consoles later this month, the devs were given a decision. Censor your game and make that sweet, sweet console money, or don't censor it and stick to PC. The devs chose the more profitable route, obviously, and they announced a new patch that would not just censor the content so it would be approved on consoles, but these changes were going to be pushed to the PC version as well. Yeah, the community is not taking that very well. I've seen countless articles, Reddit threads, and Twitter posts just talking about how everyone is upset and pissed off and how they're now going to go review bomb the game on Steam, which they are now doing. As of writing this, the game is mixed on Steam and trending downwards towards negative and then probably mostly negative. We'll see how that goes. But what I haven't seen talked about is the why. Why are these specific changes being done but not others? Why does a small change in an animation now make this game approved on consoles? Why did this game have to change but not others, which are arguably more graphic? So today we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about censorship and a company changing content after you purchased it. Is that fair? Is that legal? Do you deserve a refund? We're also going to talk about things like ESRB ratings, what makes this new version of Ready or Not console approved and not PC only, why other games that might seem more graphic do get a pass, and why these specific changes, even if they do seem small to some people, like a texture change here or an animation change there, why they go against the very core of what makes Ready or Not, Ready or Not. Ready or Not was born out of controversy. Its reveal trailer in 2017 was dark, gritty, and violent, depicting SWAT officers responding to horribly graphic situations like bloodied and dying hostages or emaciated human trafficking victims stumbling out of shipping containers. But by 2020, a small group of supporters were given early access, and the gameplay that came from that was questionable at best. Originally spun as a spiritual successor of SWAT 4, it now looked more akin to a worse version of Rainbow Six Siege, but everyone's concerns were put to rest when the game launched into early access in 2021. It was dark, it was gritty, it was violent, and at times, it was uncomfortable. It showed the very raw world that law enforcement operates in, and that drew criticism from outlets like Kotaku, calling it a violent political fantasy, even going as far as to say that Ready or Not's realism is effective enough to disturb, but too shallow not to descend into farce, or worse, Blue Lives Matter cosplay with fascist overtones and alt-right dog whistles. Ready or Not had engaging gunplay, controlling your squad was fun, actual breach and clear tactics were needed, and there was a wide variety of weapons, but the theme of depicting the unapologetic violence in the world we live in is what really carried it. As the game then entered early access, a Reddit thread popped up and asked if the devs would be including a school shooting map sometime in the future, and in a now deleted comment, the devs responded, "You better believe it's gonna." Well, corporate game management did not like that, and within days, publisher Team 17 announced that they would no longer be working with Void Interactive, and in their official announcement on the school level, they state that it's not just a part of fabric of Ready or Not's story, it is part of the fabric of thousands of people's stories worldwide. It is the story of those who have died too soon at the hands of a deranged gunman. The story of family and friends waiting for a phone call that might never come. The story of the first responders who do everything they can only for it to not be enough. It is a look at an uncomfortable reality that has become all too common, and we hope that we can play some small part in honoring those who have been impacted by these real-world tragedies with a portrayal that does not trivialize their experiences. We will continue to follow our vision, we will continue to listen, and we will continue to work every day on Ready or Not. And by the time the game entered into 1.0 in 2023, the map titled Elephant was released. Without knowing the backstory here, it might seem like this was just a map about some random school in some random town in the US, but Elephant is a 2003 movie about a school shooting based on the Columbine High School massacre, where 2 students murdered 13 of their classmates. One teacher, they planted bombs in 2 different locations in the school, and after a gunfight with police, they eventually committed suicide. The movie, Elephant, is heavily influenced by the real-life events of Columbine and takes place at Watt High School, while in Ready or Not, the in-game mission is called Elephant and takes place at Watt Community College. Additionally, the map is only one of 2 in-game that is timed due to the explosive devices, just like the ones that were placed during Columbine, and it's the only map in the game to not have any ambient music. And this isn't a one-off. The devs constantly use real-life examples for their game, such as the nightclub mission titled Neon Tomb, which was released just a few days before the 6th anniversary of the real-life Pulse nightclub shooting in Orlando, Florida. To put it bluntly, these are not comfortable missions. It's not a comfortable situation at all, and you don't just feel like you're in a school shooting, but you feel like you're in that school shooting. You feel like you're in Orlando, Florida, at the Pulse nightclub, and the weight of what actually happened there hits you, or at least it hit me. And in saying that, I think that's a good feeling. And I don't mean that I'm condoning anything that happened, of course, or that I'm generally feeling good in this moment as I'm interacting with the game, but it feels good to feel bad. There's something just innately human about feeling these types of raw emotions, and maybe I can explain this best through a personal story. So, years ago, I was in the emergency medical services field, and I was a state and nationally certified EMT. And although I never ended up signing on to a station full-time since I instead chose to go to fire school, which unfortunately got canceled due to COVID, one of the requirements to become a certified EMT is ride time on an ambulance. And you start off by being a student, you're a student for months, but when you finally pass enough of the in-class work, you pair up with a paramedic for real calls. And these guys, dude, they let you do a lot. You really get your hands dirty. It's an incredible feeling, and it really prepared me for the real world of being a first responder. So real quick, shout out to Collier County EMS. Thank you guys again for the ride time. I appreciate all the time I spent learning from you guys. But when my ride time finally came around, I was ecstatic. I'd been reading medical books, practicing in our lab on dummies, and here I was finally able to go out and put what I actually learned to work, to get my hands dirty. I was so excited that I got to the station 30 minutes before my shift. I did all the truck checks with my medic. I just walked around this tiny little station like I was at Disneyland. I was on top of the world, and when that first call came in, I ran into the back of the truck. I buckled up. I was beaming. I had my notepad out. I was pumped. This was so cool. I was finally doing it. I was being the guy. As we pull out of the station, I'll never forget this. Lights and sirens blaring, giant smile on my face. My medic shouts back to me, 2-year-old male ingested a Tide Pod. And it was like a giant wave of fear and dread and sadness all washed over me. I even got mad in that moment at the parents for a situation that I didn't even know happened. I just created these situations in my head, and here I am acting like a dumbass just a few minutes ago, getting all excited to get called out on an ambulance. And my first ever call is a kid who swallowed concentrated liquid detergent. My wife was 7 months pregnant at the time, and my first ever call was going to be a toddler that could possibly be dying. My second call that same night was a woman who overdosed behind a dumpster at a McDonald's, and that McDonald's was quite literally across the street from my apartment. I could never really go back to that McDonald's because I just picture bagging her over and over again, and it was shocking. The entire day, I went in bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, and it slapped me in the face. I'm extremely thankful that it did. I felt very real emotions that I didn't know I could feel. It prepared me for the rest of my studies. And although I wouldn't say I was ever excited to be on call again, I became excited to do work and to help and to use my knowledge and to be there for someone during what could possibly be that person's worst day in their life. And I loved it. But I needed to have that first call slap me in the face and make me realize what I was getting myself into. It's okay to be human. It's okay to feel scared and sick and disturbed. And I don't say this for pity or for a thank you or whatever. EMS was just a really small part of my life. but what it did was make me feel very real emotions, and Ready or Not made me feel those same emotions. I don't want to speak for law enforcement officers or other first responders who have been in horrible situations like what's depicted in this game, but from my own real experiences that made me legitimately scared and uncomfortable and sick and sad, this game did a surprisingly good job at replicating that. Games are a form of art. They can be fun, and yeah, we can share a laugh with our buddies as we accidentally flashbang them while we breach, but it's also okay to walk into a completely quiet school with dead students lying around and be super uncomfortable. It's okay to feel the weight of what just happened and try to work through that. It's okay to be disturbed sometimes as you break into a room and see a child convulsing from drugs she was forced to take as she was abused. It's okay to be shaken when you open a container and you see naked, emaciated women coming out of it. Because that stuff actually happens, and it is shocking. It's not fun. It's not sexy like what Call of Duty tries to make it seem. It's all really disturbing. And this adds a whole new layer to the game. You need to not just breach and clear, but you need to process all these emotions while you do it. And this brings us to the crux of the issue. In order to be rated and approved for consoles, games have to go through different approval boards. Not only do you have the standard gaming approvals like the ESRB in the US, which will rate a game from E to everyone up to AO for adults only, but you also have console-specific approvals where Microsoft, Sony, and Nintendo literally can say what they want or don't want on their hardware. This creates a very confusing landscape for what is approved or what is not approved in gaming. Since although the ESRB may find the use of drugs okay, the Australian Classification Board may not. Fallout 3 was actually originally banned due to its realistic depiction of drugs, with Australia's ACB citing that they just really didn't like that players could casually take morphine, because morphine is a real drug. Eventually, Bethesda changed morphine to what we all now know as MedX, and this censorship was pushed globally despite just one regional player, Australia, requiring it. Unfortunately, this is just how the world works. Certain societies have different tolerances for sex, drugs, or violence. In order to access an international player base, developers need to make sure that all of the marketable regions approve of it. This is also why World War II games now have more or less stopped making German-specific versions of their game that would censor Nazi imagery. This imagery is illegal in the country, so from a business standpoint, it's easier just to create one international version that has an iron cross instead of a swastika, and although you may get some grumblings from some people dead set on historical accuracy, you'll have a game that can be sold everywhere. What's interesting, however, is that even with all of these conflicting ratings boards internationally, Ready or Not was still sold without any regional bans on Steam. It was never adults only for excessive sex or violence. It had to be reclassified. Australia never stepped in and caused some problems. Nothing had to be toned back during its life in early access. The convulsing child and the school shooting missions caused a few articles to be written, but that content was still seen as okay to ship in the PC market. In North America, the game is rated M for mature. In Europe, it's PEGI 18, and in Australia, it's R18+. These are all ratings which are common in both PC and console gaming. But as we just said with Fallout 3, Australia is notoriously stricter when it comes to ratings, and they actually have a classification above R18 called refused classification. These are for films or games that depict, express, or otherwise deal with matters of sex, drug misuse or addiction, crime, cruelty, violence, or revolting or abhorrent phenomena in such a way that they offend against the standards of morality, decency, and propriety generally accepted by reasonable adults to the extent that they should not be classified. And if it depicts in a way that is likely to cause offense to a reasonable adult, a minor who is or who appears to be under 16, whether or not engaged in sexual activity, or promote, incite, or instruct in matters of crime or violence. So this means that even the strictest ratings board in the world, Australia, still found that Ready or Not was acceptable at an R18 rating, meaning that theoretically this should still be okay to ship for consoles unedited. So why is that important? Well, it's because the changes coming to the game are the following. Although dismemberment is still included, you can no longer dismember corpses. Gore has been toned down, specifically things like the tortured police informant in the Narcos mission. Nudity has also been addressed by adding more clothing to some civilians and a suspect. And finally, in the mission Twisted Nerve, the child's animation has gone from a convulsive, spasming animation to one which shows them unconscious or sleeping. They follow up by saying that the changes with the console version are small enough that most people here wouldn't notice if we didn't say anything, but we want to be transparent. So to recap, the strictest ratings board in the world said that Ready or Not did not have excessive themes towards sex, drug use, crime, violence, child abuse, any of that. It was there, but it was appropriate for the theme of the game. But Microsoft or Sony or both of them, they came in and they said, no, you need to dial it back. Now, we don't have word for word for why those things were rejected, but we can base our assumptions on what happened with other games. In 2024, the game Hunter x Impact was refused classification in Australia due to a scene of a visual depiction of implied sexual violence where an adult male exposes himself to persons under the age of 18 years. Now, obviously, that's not what's happening in Ready or Not. Australia agreed whatever is happening in Ready or Not is okay, but Sony and Microsoft may believe that this sexual violence is too heavily implied during the twisted nerve child bed scene. And by changing the animation from a convulsing child to one that is unconscious, it could be more palatable and players may not have to deal with the realization that this child was actively being abused. This is also most likely the case for the clothes added to the women being trafficked, as it implies violent sexual acts. The clothes dampen this by giving the player a chance to believe there is some form of humanity given to these women. Manhunt 2 back in 2007 had to explicitly darken and blur violent executions and implied sexual violence for this exact reason, allowing it to move from an adults only rating down to an M. So I don't think we're ever going to get definitions from Microsoft, Sony, Nintendo on what they actually consider too graphic or too violent or too sexual, or the themes that Australia are okay with, but they can't have on their console. I'd be very surprised if they came out and said that, and I don't think that even makes sense. Why go even further? Because we see things like this all the time. TV shows, movies, they have all this type of stuff in it, and at max will be rated R, not X. You can see this on daytime TV. You can go to the movies and see things like this. TV shows like Special Victims Unit constantly have child endangerment. Game of Thrones had gratuitous sex and even rape scenes, and King Joffrey, a child, was poisoned on screen in front of us while we all clapped for it. Well, the reason with that, and I don't agree with it, but at least in the US considers games interactive while TV and movies are passive. And according to the Congressional Senate testimony from ESRB President Patricia Vance on September 28, 2004, she stated that all media are not the same. Motion pictures and television programs usually involve visual depictions of real actors on film in realistic situations. Music consists of auditory and occasionally visual elements. Music, film, and TV are passive media, but games are interactive. This element of player control makes games unique among entertainment media, and it is not at all clear to me that one could devise a single system that could accurately or effectively capture the different aspects of various entertainment media. This was her argument for creating a different standard for games, and as such, we now have scenes in movies or TV shows that would ironically never be allowed in gaming. And it's all just because we're not interacting with it. The act of physically holding a controller, of a player controlling this character as this scene unfolds in front of them, is what is so horrible. It engages the player and makes them part of it. Or at least our society believes that. But this still begs the question, why this game and not others? Because there are plenty of extremely violent games out there where players are using a controller and interacting with a very disturbing world. Those games don't get near the level of scrutiny that Ready or Not does, and are also on console. But that might be because of the themes. Ready or Not, from its inception, has been grounded in reality, using real settings like the Pulse nightclub and Columbine High School Massacre to frame its universe. So, when you throw in graphic scenes of sexual violence, torture, and child abuse, there is no way to make it make-believe. This is not a sci-fi alien being gibbed by your chainsaw assault rifle. It's a victim who had a name. And this all goes back to the split with Team 17 over the school mission. Void Interactive said that this is part of the fabric of Ready or Not story, that you create missions like this to help tell the story of victims, of first responders, and the struggles that they have dealing with these situations. Unfortunately, when you say that at the inception of the game, it's very hard 4 years later to just say, no, I'm just kidding, it's actually not realistic. Void Interactive unfortunately got themselves stuck in the situation where you literally cannot separate reality from game when it comes to violence. Every part of violence is implied, and it's done purposely to help tell the story. And you can disagree with that, but out of all my research looking into this, seeing the past examples of censorships, the games that were approved or the ones that were denied, the content that did end up finally releasing, and my very real feelings when I was playing Ready or Not, I honestly believe someone at Sony or Microsoft just looked at it and said, dude, this is too real. You need to dial it back. Because when someone plays a PC game, the world can just be like, that's just a PC gamer being weird and inappropriate. PCs are crazy. But if someone sees child abuse on an Xbox or a PlayStation, it's now Sony or Microsoft saying they're okay with child abuse. Are they really? No, of course not. But it's marketing, it's optics, it's soccer moms who see their kids doing it on the Xbox in their living room and are just ready to be angry at something. And that's why this is such a problem for the PC community. The realness is what defines Ready or Not. And the moment you walk into a scene that has a convulsing child, you act differently because you imagine what that child has been through. The moment that you walk into a room and see a police informant mutilated beyond all comprehension, you act differently because you can see how painful the last few minutes of that person's life was. The moment you open up a container and see women not even given the decency of clothing, you act differently. Now, admittedly, from a code or graphics standpoint, these are all very small changes, right? But they result in very different sets of emotions for the players and the overall theme of the game. Now, I'm still of the opinion that these censored scenes are still very powerful and shocking in their own right, but it loses the very raw nature of what the game originally expressed. The uncensored ones are way more powerful. Now, is that worth a refund? Are players in their right to say, Ready or Not, you sold me on something that provided me a specific type of gameplay, and these changes, although small, change that completely? Maybe. I think there's an argument for that to be made, but historically the developers probably have a strong enough argument that the vast majority of the content is still unchanged. And that's not to say it's true or not true, but the only big content drop and refund success that I can really recall is No Man's Sky, where even if you had days of playtime, you still got refunds. Steam wanted to make sure that people didn't literally spend money on a scam. Features were completely gone. But I think I fundamentally disagree that players would not have noticed these changes if the devs didn't mention them. These missions are traumatic, and although new players may not see anything wrong, old players will always be able to remember the first time they walked into that room or opened that shipping container. And I do think that is why it's a valid reason to criticize the game, to stop playing it, and even write a negative review and request a refund, even if you don't get it, because this one change also means that all future updates will be sanitized from the beginning. Ready or Not's console censorship may seem like unhinged gamers just praising violence and inappropriate things, but I enjoy playing games not just for the gameplay loop sometimes. I like stories. I like to have the emotional roller coaster of what they want me to go through. It's why people like things like horror movies or crime documentaries. There's something very real about experiencing the whole range of human emotions and questioning how people can do certain things. I'm not going to go on a crime spree after watching these things, just as I wouldn't go on a crime spree after playing GTA 5. Despite some articles downplaying these changes as minor and criticizing players who want to keep them, Ready or Not made a conscious business decision to change the theme of their game. I'm sure it was difficult for them to do, and I'm sure the devs pushed back, but the amount of money that would be injected into their studio probably made them get over it eventually. Now, some people have suggested that they hope to get an uncensored version for PC gamers in the future, since despite what the devs say, and I'm not a game dev myself, but I've seen it in other games, technically it's not super difficult to have different clients with different models or textures, but I would be very surprised if I saw that. I highly doubt it, because that means every mission in the future may have to have separate builds, and people aren't making console and PC exclusives anymore. You make one for the entire game, and that's it, especially if the game has crossplay. Either way, Ready or Not has changed, and although I do think it will be a very successful game on console, because there is still not a single game out there that makes you feel those feelings, The player base is rightly upset. But people should really be more upset at Microsoft and Sony. The over-policing of their hardware is ridiculous, especially since at the minimum, 3 international ratings agencies, and I even talk about Japan, who also rated it for R17, so 4 agencies said that it was appropriate for adults without changes. That should be the real story here. How these console companies have standards that are actually going against third-party ratings, multiple third-party ratings. It's exhausting. It burns out devs. And this is also why PC players now always have a chip on their shoulders when it comes to dealing with consoles. Now, I'm not saying don't give the game a negative review if you don't like it or stop making a fuss about it online, but we really need to somehow direct our anger a bit more towards these hardware companies if real change is going to be made in the future. Money talks, and unfortunately right now, studios are listening, and that means censorship. But that's it for me. Ready or Not's going to have a tough time navigating this one. But what do you guys think? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you like the game? Hate the game now? Did I miss something? Let me know down in the comments below. And if you like the video, give it a thumbs up and share with a buddy. On this channel, I like to take a look at gaming headlines and recent releases, try to bring a little bit more critical analysis and context to them. So I hope you guys enjoyed. But until next time, peace.